Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis, this Thursday, almost the end of the week. I'm headed back to Greenville tomorrow for the weekend. I'll be back here Sunday night for a whole full week of testimony in the Alec Murdaugh double murder trial. It's been a great week. I've had such an amazing learning experience. Just can't explain how amazing this week has been for me, meeting people that I admire, and also Lisa and Dawn. Two of my listeners, two alibis, came to court today, were able to get in, and then we finished the day off at the Cracker Barrel having a very late breakfast. Sweethearts, and Dawn brought me the cutest Gigi shirt, so thank you, Dawn. Yeah, it was great meeting them, hoping to see them some more. They're an hour or so away, but man, I have the best listeners. I'm serious. You guys are amazing. I feel like y'all all are family. Y'all all my family. So before we get into testimony, music fact of the day, despite having 27 hit singles in the USA, Bon Jovi never topped the charts in the UK. What's up over across the pond, y'all? Come on out, Bon Jovi. The closest that Bon Jovi got was in 1994 with their hit single Always. They reached number 2 on the UK chart with that. Come on, man. You gotta love like some living on a prayer. All right, so let's get into this testimony. So interestingly enough, the courthouse had a lot of empty seats today, probably 4 or 5 rows towards the back. I was on the prosecution side. There was like a camera thing right in front of me, but I had a really good view of the jury and could see Alex some. So just a few little observations. When the jury was listening to the 911 call, Buster got emotional. He put his head down and you could tell it really bothered him. Alec cried, and let's see. There you go. Kathy Russin from Law and Crime Network, the amazing Kathy Russin, tweeted this out. This is from the pool photographer, and there is a tear on his nose. This was, I think, during the 911 call. But apparently, I haven't watched any of the trial. He was emotional throughout the day. So there you go. So both sides covered their monitors for the graphic videos. I'm gonna tell you, all of us in there are gonna have cricks in our necks tomorrow because we were all trying, because there were a couple people who didn't fully cover, but we all were like this, y'all. We were like trying to see something. Some of us did, and it wasn't super pretty. What I did see briefly was just horrific. And also, you don't want the family to see that. They're sitting just a few rows behind the defense, and they all have monitors, and clearly they don't want to see that. And, somebody asked today on the hour-long question and answer that we're going to do every day, by the way, on Law and Crime Network. It'll be on YouTube, their channel on Law and Crime, and they also stream it, I think, on Twitch, about Maggie's family. And no, I haven't seen anybody from her family, but I cannot blame them. This has got to be horrific for them to lose Maggie and Paul this way and everything else. And I'm empathetic. So you guys know that about me. And I feel bad for Alex's sister. And just, this is their reality. And say what you will, Paul was brutally murdered. Maggie was brutally murdered. And there's nothing pretty about it. And I just try to see the human side of the family. So I do feel bad for them all. So the jurors very much engaged today with this body cam footage because they have a monitor that they can see very clearly, leaning up, elbows on their knees, when this was played. So the first witness, Sergeant Daniel Green, he was the first person on the scene, by the way. He's with the Colleton County Sheriff's Office. He got the call to Moselle, and it took about 20 minutes to get to scene. So the 911 call came in at 10:06, and Sergeant Green, arrives at 10:26. That's a long gap there, but it's kind of remote. This is not a place where there's a house, every 50 feet. So the driveway led to the dog kennels and the shed. He got out of his car and walked by the dog kennels and the shed. Alec was at the end of the driveway. He saw Paul's body as well as Maggie's. Both had large pools of blood around them. But trigger warning, by the way, I'm sorry I didn't do this sooner. This is graphic stuff. It is a double murder trial that was very brutal. So if you're sensitive to this stuff, I totally understand if you say, yeah, I need to stop here. Not everybody can listen to this for many reasons, and I'm cool with that, and I respect it. He saw brain matter and just knew they were dead. So Alec approached, and Sergeant Green made sure Alec had no weapons. And within seconds of him walking up, Alec tells him about Paul and the boating accident. And he said, that's why this happened. The officer noted Alec was upset, no tears. He said Alex said he left the scene to go to the house to get the shotgun and brought it back. And he showed it to the officer. He had it actually leaning up against his car. And it's, as you can see, it's a very long camouflage shotgun. I'm not familiar with shotguns, but that looks pretty big. So the deputy said Alec was anxious, nervous, and upset. So the sergeant secured that shotgun in his patrol car, and they obviously brought that out into the courtroom in a big white box. So on the body cam, the dispatch is updating the officer. This is while he's en route to Moselle. They fast forward to his arrival. The prosecution says, listen to what Alex says and what he doesn't say on here. The jury fully engaged. I mean, they were leaning forward, all eyes straight ahead. You hear dogs barking, and the officer comes up upon Paul's body. Some of the jury members were just stiff, frozen. One of the jurors at one point just put their hand to their mouth. A couple looked away for a second. So then the sergeant passes Maggie's body and he asks, that's your wife and son? And Alex says, mm-hmm. Alex said, my son was in a boat crash. He's been getting threats. I know that's what this is. And when asked by the state, did you ask him about that? The officer said, no, I did not ask him about that at all. He offered it as soon as that officer walked up. By the way, just found out, we should be getting the redacted body cam footage released at some point tomorrow. So we'll be able to see at least him, obviously not the graphic body photos or videos that they have. So Alec explains his dad's in the hospital. His mom has Alzheimer's and says, you can check my phone for times, which I thought was interesting. You just found your wife and son murdered and you're telling them it's the boat crash. And also you can check my phone. So Alec's on the phone pacing around at one point. The officer didn't see any blood on him. And, while he's on the phone, Alex says, the police are here now. The officer asks when he last saw Paul and Maggie, and he said he here in person earlier that evening. He does not know exactly what time. He said that he and Paul had rode around in their pickup for a couple of hours looking at trees they had planted. So the officer asks Paul's birthday, Maggie's full name. He gives it. The officer says at this point, Alec is panicky, breathing heavy. He's sweating, but he's not crying, not complaining he can't breathe, that kind of thing. So fire and rescue arrives, and the sergeant starts putting up crime scene tape. He notes that he saw shell casings around Maggie's body, many shell casings, and only a couple around Paul. The officer also sees tire impressions in the wet grass, and Alex says he sees more tracks than were his. He said only 2 were his, and that was to the kennel and then back to the house. It was in grass, though. You can't make casings of this. But at this point, fire and rescue covers the bodies with these sheets. Alec was there, but kind of stayed away from the scene, and at one point, he's calling his brother, John Marvin. And Alec tells another officer about the boat crash. SLED at this point had been called, and they have a regional office here in the Low Country, but the crime scene comes from Columbia. They got there after midnight. It's about an hour 45 drive from Columbia to Islandton. So there's a bit of a gap there where that crime scene's got to be secured before they get there to process the crime scene. So Sergeant Green asked detectives to start a crime scene log, like who comes in the scene, what time, and at some point, John Marvin, which is Alec's brother, shows up to the scene. At this point, it started to rain a bit, and so they raised the blanket over Paul to see if they raise it up from Paul to see if they can find a weapon. And at this point, they just don't know, is this a murder suicide? They don't know yet. They note that Paul's phone is on top of the pocket of his shorts, not inside. And we know they found blood inside that pocket, by the way, which tells you that the murderer had blood on his hands and went in there. So they show a photo of these tire impressions, and Sergeant Green was on scene for hours. He said he was there when Sled arrived. There was some more, but it was just a little bit of back and forth things we know. Cross exam, he asks about him talking to the prosecution and says that the defense had left him voicemails and that sort of thing. In other words, you hadn't returned our calls. And the officer says that he talked to the state 4 or 5 times about the body cam footage. There was water in those dog pens and also outside where it had pooled. Now, just to note, at this point, it had not rained yet. So apparently, Paul's clothing was wet from this, as well as what the sergeant describes as blood and tissue. I think what the state may try to do with this is indicate this is just a theory on my part. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a judge. I have no legal training. So, but was there cleanup of some sort before? But Harpootlian says, you wash the dog pins out when a dog defecates in there. And so, I mean, yeah, I guess you would. He talks about the shotgun and the shells inside that shotgun, and he points out that it's a 12 gauge shotgun, and there was 12 gauge ammo and 16 gauge shells in there. And he says he's using this to show, I think, Alec's frame of mind after finding the bodies and getting the shotgun before going back to the kennels where the bodies are. So the officer said that he released the gun to Sled and did not know what type of ammo was inside. But the defense points out you can't shoot a 16 gauge shotgun shell from a 12 gauge. It's going to blow you up if you tried. There were multiple blackout casings around Maggie's body. The defense asked about the tire tracks he saw and asked if he preserved them. The officer said no. He asked, did you instruct anyone to take photos of them? And he said, no, that's not my job. Asked if he instructed Sled to take photos of those tire marks. He said, no, not his job. And he also asked if you could tell if it was multiple vehicles or just one. And he said, no. Also, did you take Sled to show them where these tire marks are? And he said, no. There were some footwear impressions behind that shed, by the way. He didn't photograph them or tell Sled about them. We'll get to those later. Sometimes this testimony can overlap because this officer was on scene, but we haven't heard from the other witness who kind of fills in the gaps. And honestly, y'all, I'm just too tired to kind of put it in chronological order with the witnesses, so bear with me. The defense says, you put up yellow tape, and the officer says, yeah, that's to make sure nobody crosses it. And at this point, there was also no high intensity lights, just headlights. Now, when I saw part of the body cam footage, it was pitch black out there, y'all. It's in the middle of nowhere. There's not street lights. It's dark. It is dark. You probably can't see 2 feet in front of you without any lights. But the defense talked about covering the bodies before Sled arrived. And the witness said that Alec asked for them to be covered, which there's some things that confuse me about this because number one, you've got him just there at the crime scene hanging out, right? He's on the phone pacing around. Who knows what evidence is up there that they haven't found? Also, you're allowing family members to come onto the crime scene. It just is a little bizarre. So they show the graphic photos or videos of Maggie's body. On video, you hear officers say the cartridges are blackout cartridges, and the defense asks who was walking around that area. So the witness says the names of the officers that were in that area. And on the body cam video, Harpootlian, he asked who's standing in that feed room. That's the area we know Paul was shot and killed at. And Harpootlian says the fatal shot came in that area. You're walking on top of where the shots were fired. Did you protect your feet to preserve that crime scene? He says no. So you can see where Harpootlian's going with this is that this crime scene, what I think is going to be a big point for them is this crime scene was not preserved properly. And who knows what evidence was destroyed or manipulated or whatever. So the defense says you've seen them put on white protective gear to preserve evidence, shoe coverings. And the defense asked, did you see any bloody footprints? And the officer says, I don't know. Defense says they could have been created by anyone walking in that area. And the cop said it's standard procedure. And the defense says standard procedure to stand where there's blood and brain matter. What if there was exculpatory or incriminating evidence and it was destroyed because you and SLED didn't fully preserve that crime scene? That's why you don't do this. Also, he points out putting the yellow tape around the kennels. But if someone drove in and committed these murders and left, those tire tracks could have been obliterated by his men. And he asked why he turned off his body cam. And the officer says, once my job is done, my body cam can go off. And now it's time for our paid sponsor of the week, Base. The Base Weekender bag is my new go-to for short or long trips. As you guys know, I'm on assignment now covering a trial away from home, and the Weekender bag has so much space, I actually cut down the number of bags I usually carry from 3 to 1. It even has padded space for your laptop. Are you like me and misplace your keys while on vacation? The Weekender bag has a clip inside to make sure you don't lose your keys while traveling. You got dirty clothes or shoes? Not a problem. The Weekender bag has a separate compartment on the bottom that's separate from the main compartment. The material is durable and the shoulder strap is super comfortable even when the bag is full. There's so many little nooks and crannies for all your travel needs. The bag comes in stylish colors and I chose navy. The Weekender bag was actually created by actress Shay Mitchell, and she really thought of everything a frequent traveler needs. The Weekender bag even fits in the overhead compartment on planes. In fact, I've ordered 2 for my parents for their upcoming cruise after they fell in love with mine. Make your packing more efficient and stylish with the Base Weekender bag. And guess what? Base has over 30,000 5-star reviews. So what are you waiting for? Even better, right now, Base is offering my listeners 15% off your first purchase by visiting basetravel.com/whattheworld. Go to basetravel.com/whattheworld for 15% off your first purchase. That's Base, BEIS travel.com/whattheworld. They say that Alec talked about the tire tracks coming and going, and he told you those weren't his tire tracks, correct? And he says yes. In the footage, a deputy can be heard saying that there could not be a gun under Paul's body unless it's the shortest 300 blackout that's ever been made. So on redirect, any evidence you contaminated the scene, he said, not that I know of. The tire marks behind Alec's car, it was in wet grass, not dirt. You couldn't get an impression. That's right. Alec said he left once and came back, so he admitted that 2 of those marks could have been his. The officer had no detailed knowledge of the boat crash. He didn't realize it was Paul that had been murdered until Alec mentioned it, and immediately when the officer arrived on scene. So on recross, the defense says it's not unreasonable Alec mentions the boat crash because in his mind, this is the only explanation as to why this happened. Then he said something about dew on the grass because there was a comment made by I don't know if it was the state or the witness about there was dew on the grass. And so the defense says it's 10 p.m. and mentions, no expert said if the tracks were from a Suburban or a pickup or whatever kind of car. So the next witness, Corporal Chad McDowell from the Colleton County Sheriff's Office, he approached crime scene to see what was needed. And Officer Green was interviewing Alec at the time. Now, Alec sees him and says, all of a sudden, how you doing? Just out of the blue, how you doing? He saw that the interview was going on, so he went back to his car. He also had body cam footage. His role at the scene like this is to help preserve the scene and then turn it over to another agency. Alex asks, can you cover them up? So Fire and Rescue actually asked them not to if they didn't have to, but they said they would since the family was on scene. He asked for so the Corporal Chad McDowell. Did I say that right? McDowell. Yeah, I'm sorry. He asked for crime scene tape from another deputy to mark shell casings that he saw in some gravel. And you hear him say 300 blackout casing, and there are several by Maggie's body. So he placed the tape there to make sure the casings weren't disturbed. He went to the feed room and saw the phone on Paul's back pocket as well. He said he literally jumped or leapt out of that feed room not to disturb the body. They note that Paul's hands were under his body, kind of tucked because he's face down, and his arms are just under his stomach or chest area. They show a still image of Alec asking him, how you doing, when he walked up, by the way. So on cross, he asked who his supervisor was when he arrived on that scene, and he says that it was Green, the previous witness. The defense asked, what instructions did he give you? And he said, I was just there to assist. The defense says, were you trying to determine what happened? And he answered that he was just securing the scene. The defense says, you pulled the sheet off Paul's body. Were you looking for another weapon? And the witness said, I assisted lifting the sheet off of Paul. The defense says, did you have anything on your feet when you went into the feed room? He says, no. And he's asked, was there any discussion of a murder-suicide? He says, yes, there was. And then about the casings, you walked in the grass. You may have disturbed evidence. And the witness says it's possible. So the defense asked, why look for shell casings? Why not wait until morning? Did anyone ask you to? And he said, no. The defense says, were you trying to solve the crime? And the witness says, we were trying to market for them to bring awareness to the item. The defense says, well, why walk around at all? This is all Harpootlian, by the way. We hear he's a wizard on cross-examine. You see that today. I mean, he's very good at what he does. We'll just say that. The defense says, why walk around at all? You're trying to process the scene. You don't know what you're doing. And the witness says, I was careful not to disturb the scene. Harpootlian says, how far away was the first shell casing? And he said, a few feet. And the defense says, the shell casing to the right of the door, did you sketch where you found it? He said, no. So Harpootlian says, what's your training in crime scene processing? And he says, well, basic law enforcement school. Harpootlian said, could you have rendered them aid? And he says, no. So on redirect, are you a first responder? And the witness says, I secure the scene and make sure nobody comes in who isn't supposed to. So the prosecutor says, if you see evidence, what do you do? And he says, I mark it so it's not disturbed. So that's lunch. We all go to lunch. Afternoon. Alec looks at the jury some. The witness to take the stand was Tanisha Bryson Smith, who works for 911. Oh, Lord, y'all. Brain, tongue, like opposite directions. Okay, so she explains when a call comes into 911, and it's placed on a cell phone, the cell tower picks up the location and routes the call to the nearest county. And so part of the 911 call is played. There is an unredacted version of this, and it was played. You hear Alex say he's shot in the head. He's shot real bad. He also says Paul's been in a boat crash and has been getting threatened for months and months and months. When asked if he knows who threatened Paul, he said no, but Paul did. And he said he did report it when asked if they did. Next witness was Angela Stallings from Collington County Sheriff's Office. She oversees the 911 call center. And I didn't know this, but the 911, once the call is placed, it starts recording before the call is even answered. So the 911 call is played. This is when I noticed Buster was emotional. Alex says there's blood everywhere. I can see his brains. When asked, did they shoot themselves? He says, oh no, hell no. He's shot in the head. He shot really bad. Maggie has a hole in her head. During this time, while this 911 call is being played, this is when Alec is, he's shaking, crying, and all that. Also, his sister was emotional. At 10:13, he asks if they're on their way, and they ask him to turn his hazard lights on so that cops can see where the kennels are. Remember, he tells them that the house isn't on the road. So the dispatcher asks him not to touch the bodies in case there's evidence. Alex said he touched to see if they were breathing. Then he says he needs to go and he needs to call his family. And he's told to put the gun in his car. And Alex says, absolutely. The next witness is Chief Barry McRoy, who's the fire chief. So when they got the call, they had 2 ambulances on the way and a helicopter on standby, not knowing the severity of the injuries or the fatalities. Dispatch said not to go to the scene, but he ended up and followed a deputy on what he called a very long and dark driveway. Paul was face down by the kennels. Maggie was face down about 30 feet away. And Alec was on the phone in the distance, seemingly very upset. So he says they covered the bodies to shield them from the public and the family. He said Paul's brain was by his ankles and he didn't check for a pulse. Maggie had a hole in her head. And at this point, the jury was kind of shuffling in their seats a little bit. So on cross, it was said that he had worked with Alec in a professional capacity and he activated his scene lights since it was very dark. And he saw tire tracks to the right about 20 to 30 feet from the bodies. He told a deputy about the tire tracks and tried to block the driveway, but he said vehicles kept driving in. So, next witness, Captain Jason Chapman. He heard the 911 call actually before he was dispatched to Moselle. And he talked to the sheriff while he was on the way and was told it was Alec Murdaugh and that he would notify SLED now due to a conflict of interest. Since crime scene comes from Columbia, that's about an hour, 45 minute. Like I said, that's a drive. He arrived on the scene at 10:35. The average response time for the SLED crime scene team is around 2 hours. Sheriff and the detective came about 12 to 13 minutes after the first officers arrived. But while he was on his way, he was told to maintain the integrity of the crime scene and to limit the personnel inside. Now, there was a storm approaching, and it was about 45 minutes out, and he asked for a tent to put over the bodies. He also got the office working on a search warrant, which was quickly acquired. The weather was hot and sticky. Welcome to South Carolina in June. It was 79 degrees, 89% humidity. No rain yet, but a tent was placed over Maggie. Paul was covered by kind of this awning above those kennels or the feed room area. At this point, I noticed Alec was rocking kind of back and forth really slowly, but it was noticeable to me. He saw the sheets over the bodies when he got there and he didn't like it, but it's already done. So they don't know. There's 2 weapons. Are there 2 shooters? He looked at the bodies to be sure there were no weapons. So 2 deputies lifted the sheet up. He told them not to drag that across the body. So the first 2 kennels had standing water outside, and Paul was saturated with blood, tissue, and possibly water from the ground. Paul's phone was collected and bagged as evidence, and he doesn't recall any blood being on Paul's phone. He also said this is only the second crime scene he has seen that 300 blackout ammo used in a homicide. Guys, these bullets are so long. I mean, they're as long as my pinky, maybe as long as my middle finger, but I better not stick that up here, okay? Alex spoke to him. He was breathing hard, not crying. He was sweating and didn't notice any blood on his shirt either. So they have 911 give them the calls. And he said it helps them to get information they may have missed. They see what is said versus what they see on scene. That's very smart. I never thought of that. But Alec tried to check the pulse. So this officer looks at his hands and his shirt and sees no blood. And the prosecution asked, would you have blood on you if you checked Paul for a pulse? Where would he touch Paul? His hands are under his body, right? His wrists, where you would normally check for a pulse, they're under his body. The neck, not accessible. He's face down, and it would be difficult to manipulate that body. The witness said, I would be bloody if I tried. And that was a really great point by the state, which is it is a gruesome, very bloody crime scene. And how are you going to check for a pulse if the neck's really not there and the hands are tucked? So I thought that was a really good point to maybe poke a hole. He explains him leaving to get the gun before police arrived could extend the crime scene to the house. And he also said he noticed a demeanor change when they were looking at those tire tracks. He said Alex's breathing slowed down. He watched them from the corner of his eye, and when they were finished, he became emotional again. There were tire tracks close to Maggie's body as well. So they did the gunshot residue kit on him. He was cooperative. He said there's a 6-hour window to do that test for it to be accurate. And he also noticed that Alex seemed fixated on Paul's body more than he did Maggie's. He also wondered, how did Paul and Maggie get to the kennels? There's no other cars there, right? It's 1,000 yards to the house and it's pitch dark. Alex said they would have driven Paul's car, but guess what? That Paul's truck wasn't on the property. Get this. It was found the next morning on Highway 63 at the Hampton County line. How did it get there? See, these little things that we don't know, these little nuggets that makes you go, whoa, what's up with that? They saw flat footwear impressions that went around that former hangar area. Ultimately, they decided they were similar to the shoes Maggie was wearing. So on Cross, it's Harpootlian. Did Alex say he tried to roll them to get a pulse? The answer was no. Did he get blood on it? He did get blood on his shorts. About the demeanor change, is it maybe he thought you found evidence that pointed to the actual killer? He said, sure. He asked, did you take photos? He said the rain had started and Sled was there. In other words, once Sled's there, that's their crime scene. These guys are no longer probably actively participating at that crime scene. And the defense talks about the statement the day after, saying there's no threat to the community. And he says, weren't you afraid there maybe was a serial killer out there, a brutal killer or something like that? And the witness says that statement would not have come from their office. At this point, I noticed a juror was dozing off, by the way. So on redirect, they talk about the path of foot impressions. They cross one side to the other. There's an objection by Harpootlian that's overruled. He asked for the jury to be excused. Then the prosecution, I could not hear very well, that says something about lying in water. There's an objection that is sustained, and Harpootlian says, thanks, Judge. And the judge says, I don't need to be thanked for my ruling. I mean, several jurors laughed out loud. And that's pretty much it for today. It was an interesting day. It was interesting to hear that unredacted 911 call, by the way. That's something we all haven't heard. And that's going to be the whole trial, y'all. We think we know all this stuff. And but there are things that the prosecution has that we don't know about yet. And maybe some things the defense has. Who knows? Anyways, again, I've had a great time. Talked to Will Folks today for a minute. We took our picture. I tweeted that out. He's great. He's a local boy. I'm a Clemson fan. He was a Gamecock fan, but I'm gonna let that slide. Just seeing Shanley and Brian Inton and all these people that I respect so much. Mr. Bamberg, it's amazing to see everybody here supporting justice, because ultimately that's what this case is about. It's about justice for Paul, Maggie. In some ways, people see this as justice for Mallory Beach. We still are awaiting justice for Stephen Smith and Gloria Satterfield and the many victims that have been financially ripped off by this man. A lot of families, you think about the crimes he's accused of, 99 indictments. Think about the reach of those crimes and all the people that's affected personally. Far reaching. We ain't seen nothing yet, y'all. This case is going to be the one that keeps giving more charges. It does make me sad to see like his sister upset and stuff. She's very nice. We spoke briefly, and she seems to be a very nice lady. So wasn't a conversation, but we did exchange hellos. Anyways, all right, guys. Last day tomorrow. I'm bringing it to you, but as soon as court ends, I'm hitting the road to Greenville. I cannot wait to see my Grammy and my babies and my mama and my daddy and my brother and my whole family, because I love everybody. We're just a tribe. We are one solid unit. So tomorrow's testimony will be very late, because I'm not even going to touch it until everybody in my house is asleep. I'm going to just eat them up when I get home. Could even be Saturday morning, but it's coming. So I'll keep you updated with some tweets and things like that until I can get the full episode out. In the meantime, welcome to all the new listeners. This is what I'm going to do every single day. Break down all these hours of testimony into one condensed little episode. So if you can't watch, don't want to watch, you know what's up every day in the courtroom. And I'm very lucky that Law and Crime asked me to come down and sit in that courtroom on their behalf. So followed them all over social media. Super grateful. My producer Elizabeth leaves tomorrow and I might cry. And Josh, the photog, amazing. They have been like my Yoda. They have taught me so much this week. And I feel like next week, Anjanette's coming into town. I'm so stoked about that. Get to spend a week with her down here. And she is a pro. So I'm kind of in like college right now, learning every day. And I'm grateful for the experience. And I'm grateful for all you guys trusting me to bring you the latest facts in the case. All facts, no spin. We don't do that here. All right, guys, have a good night. I'm going to bed. See you soon.